Wait for it. And a 3, and a 2, and a 1. Welcome, everybody, to the official first episode of the Viking Empire podcast with your hosts, Cristofo and Bryce. Myself and Cristofo, the other fine gentleman, is Bryce. Bryce, say hello to the fine people at home.
Hello, everyone. Today's episode will be sponsored by Keystone Crystals. You get your crystals. Man, I almost made it sound like a Menards thing. Um, you
Save
get
big money.
save big money. I'm not even gonna. I don't want lawsuit, but Keystone Crystals is an amazing thing. I mean, they're into the crystal healing and all that greatness. Um, pretty heathenistic in a sense. But yeah, take it away.
Odin himself would buy one.
Oh
So,
God.
folks, some of you might have tuned in to our live stream. Some of you might not have. For those of you who did not, welcome to the first time. For those of you who did, welcome back. What this podcast is about delving into those wonderful people of the yesteryears, the Vikings, primarily from the years 700 up all the way up to 1200. We're going to be examining the time, the place, the people, the events, all of the religious insights, what they believed, how they believed it, why they did it, all that stuff, and hopefully learn a couple of things along the way. I myself know almost nothing about the Vikings. Bryce over there, he's kind of my guiding star. He uh
Guidance.
he knows a lot about them, their Vikings.
I
And
sure do.
so really this podcast is going to be, I'd say about what, one third actual history, one third insight to other topics, either contemporary or historical past, and one third just random banter that really has nothing to do with the topics at hand, but that's just how we talk.
Yeah, that's
Or something
actually
like that.
yeah, right. Is that normal conversation? No.
All I can say. Normal conversation, but damned.
But damned. So we're gonna be talking about the creation of Midgard.
Yes, indeed. We figured if you're going to tell a story, you might as well start it at the beginning. And what better way to do it than the creation myths of the
The
Vikings?
creation.
The myths, the legends of old. And we begin, I suppose, with the creation, as many cultures do. But the
So,
Vikings have a very interesting one. And Bryce here, he's going to tell us about that.
I so Ymir, the giant, the pretty much what I like to call the all father giant in a sense. Because I mean he did I mean he's a he
Spit it out, man!
okay, he created humans and gods out of his armpits
Hey,
after
man,
he
you got
sweated
to work with
by
what
the
you have.
sun. Oh yeah, goddamn soul. I mean, soul. Like it's hard enough. It's a really hot weather, and you're gonna be dripping out some gods out there. Um,
Love it.
so it's actually pretty, more interesting and very metaphorical and kind of romantic in a sense. Not the new romantic kind of thing going
Not the
on.
actual act of sweating out gods through your armpits, but more so, in the very passionate, very poetic sense, the very representative, like the storytelling that puts logic by the wayside and just kind of goes with the gut instinct. Yeah, I like it.
Right,
I like it.
right. So,
So we got gods sweating out of armpits by Ymir, the giant.
yep. And so Mir had this cow, right? This cow named I'm trying to remember the name. Beery. No, that's this. Okay, never mind. It's a
Ooh,
dumbla, or
come
something
again?
like that. It's very hard to pronounce nowadays. But I'm sure there's people out there that can actually pronounce it way better than me. Um,
Audmula, maybe.
Odumbla.
That's
Ugh.
another thing too. Quick shout out. We are gonna butcher every Nordic, Norse, Scandinavian, Baltic regional name that comes
Uh,
across us. I apologize in advance to those proud peoples and their lengthy histories, but we're gonna take a machete to your language. Hopefully, as time goes on and this podcast develops,
right,
we get a
right.
little neck for it. We get a little neck.
We'll get a little bit more better with our diction and prose here.
There you go.
Um, so Odumbla, the cow, right?
Licking from ice, if I recall.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, I was just waiting for your input there. So I was just,
Line
I was like,
ice.
keep leading this, because I wanted to hear your little tangent or input, but we got your input. So a dumbla, if like her udders, her milk, turned into rivers and all this shit, right? And she started licking some random like ice things, and
Hmm.
humans and gods came out of it. Right.
The
So
hell? Really?
yeah, it's kind of weird. Um,
This kind of one ups the oh, I almost want to say it's the Inuit who have the creation myth where the world was born on the back of a giant tortoise, or maybe the
oh,
Huron or the
that's
Sioux or
isn't that
something.
that's I think
But I
that's
always
ancient,
thought
isn't
I
it?
always thought that was like one of the wackiest and weirdest and most inventive creation myths. But honestly, shoot, Vikings might be in the running for it.
Yeah, I
Unwilla
think so.
licking ice blocks, and it's like, the fuck's this? Humanity. Oh, okay.
Makes sense.
That's nuts. So, is there an Earth then at this point?
Okay,
Is
yeah.
is
I
is
mean,
there is
well,
there like
technically, it's like it's called Ginnigagap, whatever. Ginnigip.
ooh ooh
It sounds like a North, like '80s rap thing. Ginnigagap, Ginnigagap,
did it hit?
Ginnigagap,
Oh,
Guinea. Yeah, wow.
and we do have some notes off to the side here, people, which is probably a
Hey,
very welcome thing for those of us who suffered through the test live stream. But I'm seeing this
right.
word, Ginnungagap, Ginnungagap,
Ginnigagap.
the void
Okay.
between Muspel and Niflheim
That's
before the creation. Ginnungagap. All right.
Muspelheim. Side note: Salter remains there. Yeah, that's
Huh.
where he just hangs out. Niflheim, I forgot, man. I'm still brushing up on my whole knowledge of all this, but it's gonna
Hey,
be
dude.
fun to go on.
That's why we're here. That's what the whole journey
Right.
is about.
And there's gonna be people that are gonna put in their input and whatnot. So
Hell yeah.
yeah, I mean, you got a mirror and a Dumbla, the one with her, nourished Emir with her milk. Like he basically sat there with a little cow and sucked on its titty until he
Hey,
was
man.
fully huge and shit. And then he was like, all right, a Dumbla. Yep, I'm pretty big now, and I mean, I'm not sure if there was like some issues going on with like she started catching feelings or a Dumbla caught feelings, but he let her go
Huh.
and he licked. She licked these ice things and all this stuff, right? Um, and Beery came out of one. Beery was like one of the most well known gods, like one of the first Acers. I mean, like he eventually just
Acer
disappeared. Whatever.
being the
Acer,
god,
yeah.
or
So there's
or, or the word of God, or like just referring to the group of
it's an
gods.
actual tribe. Like there's
Oh,
two
okay.
different tribes in Norse mythology. There's the Vanir and the Aesir, and they both had a war. Eventually, but we'll get to that
Well,
point later in the
yeah.
episodes. And eventually, like
I mean, every good story needs a war,
oh
and
god, you know
thankfully,
it.
this story, the Viking story,
You
is up
Roman.
to its ass in wars.
Oh god, man, like we're still fighting. You're still fighting. We're still fighting, bro. But
Bury, huh? I
yeah,
like that.
Beery, and then he eventually had a son named Bor, and there's Besla and the daughter of Bothrin or whatever. I'm gonna link all this stuff up to our podcast so people can even like look at it,
Oh
because
yeah.
it's interesting stuff, and this is like actual this is very factual because I've um read this in a couple of books, but me and my short-term memory loss cannot hold information worth worth a darn.
Yeah, man. Those
Sometimes I
goddamn
even forget your
millennials, am I
name.
right?
Yeah, man.
Don't
Man,
worry.
it's all that
Bryce and I
diet
are
stuff.
firmly within that generation.
I don't accept it. I believe in reincarnation.
It's too
No,
late, Bryce. It's too late.
too
All right,
late.
so we have creation. I'm imagining a sort of void, some sort of form, and Emir just kind of manifests himself. He just kind of is.
He is, man. Like he's
He
the
just
first of the ice
is.
giants.
And then
It was
he
half of
somehow
the
makes Admula, however you pronounce the cow's
yeah,
name, or she
yeah,
shows up, just kind of manifests as well. There's just a giant and a cow at the beginning of time.
yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Sweet. Okay,
I
cool.
forgot where Dumbo comes from, but I mean, I'll probably skim through the notes, or people
Ah,
will be generous enough to even post it under our video here. But so Bor and Besla have some children and all that greatness, because unlike their papa
and
Emir,
Bor and Besla, who are they? They were the children of Buri.
Oh yeah, going back to Aesir. Aesir's a one tribe of gods. You know, the known gods of the Aesir are, uh, Odin, Tyr, and Thor. You know, so
Yeah.
and I mean, eventually, so they're just basically half giants and half like real, half gods. And that's where
Interesting.
the huge issue of where the ice giants come from, like, and that's why they're always like later in like battling with these ice giants, is because after a while, when Odin's born from Besla and Vili and Ve, his two brothers, Odin's two brothers, Vili and Ve, they
Hmm.
murder the shit out of their grandpa Ymir.
Ooh.
Cuckoo, cuckoo,
Let's
cuckoo.
see. That's not necessarily patricide. That's grandpa side.
Well,
What
I
is it
mean,
with these damn creation myths? It's just
I
like as soon as they come into the wedding, it's just like, hey, who's that? It's your grandpa. Let's kill him.
right,
Let's start a
right.
war.
I love it.
Jesus.
I love it.
Calm down.
I love
Let's
it.
enjoy a few millennia before we start hacking heads off, you know?
Yeah.
Let's hang out with Mulan and lick
Well,
some
because
ice.
okay, so Odin, Vili, and Ve were like, okay, this place is like, it's Ginnegap. It's Ginnegap, whatever.
Oh,
It,
that damn
it's
word.
it's like this
Hold
void
on.
of ice.
Hold on, Bryce. We have to match this word. Gnungagap. which is the current plane of existence at this time, I'd imagine, right? Gnunga
Yes,
Gap
yes.
is Gnunga Gap is where all these characters, the Aesir, is Ymir the giant, and Admula the cow, I suppose, are existing, and that is, if I'm reading this correctly, the void between Muspel and Niflheim
Where
before
the two,
creation.
like, yeah, yeah. So I mean, like,
So what is
what's
then Muspel and Niflheim?
so Muspelheim is like this realm of just fire. It's one of the original realms, just burning fire, right? And the other one, Niflheim, is all ice. I mean, it's kind of most likely
Interesting.
compared to Jotunheim, where the giants eventually go after a bunch of all this other stuff we'll talk about in the later stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool though that two of like these ancestral regions of creation are kind of, the antithesis of each other. One is very active and hot, I'd imagine Muspel, you said.
right. I mean,
And
like
then
if you think about it,
Niflheim is, those the glacier place. It's very cold and still. I like it.
yeah. I mean, if you think
Cuz
about it, it's like the two things that, I mean, it's like the two, like, well, I mean, how there's, okay, like the four things of like earth, magic, or earth, fire, water, and all that. The Vikings back
I
then,
believe,
like,
sir, it goes Earth, Wind, and Fire. Do
earth,
not
wind, and
besmirch the
fire.
70s funktastic band. Do you remember the 21st of September?
Oh,
Do they make an appearance in the Viking Tale? Well, we'll add him in somewhere. We'll add him in. We'll add him
we'll
in.
make it. We'll make it happen.
Anyway,
We'll make it
we're,
happen.
we'll just reinvent history here.
Oh my
Happens
god.
daily. Happens daily. So we're talking about raw elements
Yeah. So I mean, back
in
then,
relation to what, the worlds, the planes.
if you think, right, yeah. So I mean, like these realms, like, are you're in a void. Like, how I imagine it is Ymir's floating in space with a fucking cow. No, just kidding. There's a clear plane, like, but it's like nothingness, right? It's just
Yeah.
him and his cow. I mean, ice from Muspelheim, and or not Muspelheim, Niflheim, and all that stuff. But you know, it's it's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, for sure, for
It's
sure.
really
And
crazy, and that's the only elements
and
these
our
people
and
have
our
seen.
and our Muspel and Niflheim just the two main regions in existence, quote unquote, right now.
Sorry, I'm listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. Let's groove.
I,
I'm done.
I want to imagine God, what is that song? Get Down or Groove Tonight? But I want to imagine that song did play at the birth of creation with Ymir and
It may,
Almula just kind of walking through the plains of Niflheim.
makes me want to make an animation of it. Just like
Why not?
Black Void, Emir and this cow just chilling. He's sitting there sucking on its titty, and then all of a sudden,
Earth,
you
Wind, and
got
Fire starts playing.
Elon Musk's little
Elon
drive.
Musk.
His little. He's like, okay, this is the cosmos, man. This is gonna
This
go
is
get
true.
that.
Elon
So
is the
yeah,
master of the cosmos. It only makes
right.
sense he was there at the beginning of creation.
Maybe his little robotic car actually like uh changed the world into, and then it goes back in time and parallel
And
universes, and it's so
founds
hilarious.
the Viking creation. Like, what if Elon Musk is Ymir? Bryce, my God, we've blown this fucker wide open already,
Right.
and we're not even 20 minutes in.
That's
No,
so
all
awesome.
right. This creation process of the Norse mythology has Ymir the giant, Alma the cow. Um, Ymir is popping off gods left and right in his armpits. Almala is looking ice blocks, discovering more gods, more humans, or discovering humans.
Yeah.
So we have gods and humans to a point. Is there a place for the humans to walk around with when all this is going on, or do we need like a
So
realm
okay, it never
created for
was.
humanity?
It was never humans. It was mostly gods. Like humans
Okay.
come a little bit later, like out of whatever. I'll get to that
So
by
the giant
asking
space
Atla.
cow licking ice does not discover or make humans. She's just uncovering more gods in
Yeah.
this
Yep.
Niflheim scape of sorts.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So when
So
Odin,
yeah. So then take us to the next step is Odin, as you're just going into. What the hell? Him and his two brothers. What are they up to?
they're like, they it's so desolate. How I imagine it's desolate in this void. Um, so I'm assuming that's why they're like, screw this. Let's. Emir's a big buff guy, like,
Yeah.
and he's like popping out all these ice giants, and like they're not true like gods. They're not gods like us. So he probably was like, Odin's probably like, hey, Philly, Vey, tonight, let's make Midgard. And they're like, what? And what? What's Midgard? And Odin's probably just like, hey, man, just follow my lead. And they, like, and I'm assuming Odin had a lot of ale at that time, where he's just probably like, oh, you want
Well, yeah, dude.
Midgard? You
I
want to
mean,
make
if all
some?
you got for company is an ice-looking cow floating above the
Right,
voids of the
right.
cosmos, I too would probably intake a lot of ale.
Oh, geez, man. You know, I mean, sucking on a cow's titty for the only nutrients you can have.
It would get tiring. It would
It
get
would get
tiring.
really. I mean, even if you killed it for some burgers or something, and
You can't kill the
you
space
can't
cow.
do it. Yeah. Oh
That's
my
too funny.
god.
All right, so Odin and his brothers go on out into the void of the cosmos after creation,
Yes.
and they seek to create Midgard. And Midgard, if I recall, is where we humans reside.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I would imagine mid the etymology, it's kind of like a guard of like, I don't know, like a middle ground. I
Yeah.
wonder. I wonder if middle
It's
ground is that if Midgard is the father root for the term middle ground, which
right.
who
Right.
knows?
Because I believe the humans were created first. Um,
First in relation to who, or
first
for
relation from Odin and all them.
okay,
Without the stuff. So they like think of it. Think of this. This is like a flat plane, right? It's a
yeah,
flat plane. Flat earthers would really like this right now because
yeah,
this
dude.
is, I mean,
If you're a flat earther, your place is in mythology.
right? Oh, oh man. But it's more so like, it's actually pretty interesting because you can take it any way you want. I mean, because this is like before, BC, like the Christianity and everything. This is where they came up with everything. And, you know, but after that happened, Vili and Vey and Odin were like, all right, let's they cut him up and sliced Ymir's throat and all this entrails and stuff. And,
Mm.
like the ocean was made, like, and then the oceans appeared. Like that's kind of like one of the first things, and that's from his blood. Like, and an ice giant. Like in
Oh,
fact,
so they're
so
so the world was created from Ymir.
yeah, like technically it's a world of
Interesting.
ice. It's a world of
Interesting.
ice.
So what Ymir is like our father in a sense. It's the foundation of our existence.
Yeah, I mean, if you got hippies nowadays and they're like, yeah, praise Mother
Regrettably, Bryce,
Earth,
we do still
it's
have hippies
Father Emir.
nowadays.
It's it's Father Emir, man. You get that right, you goddamn hippies. It's goddamn
Interesting.
goddamn granddad Emir. So yeah, I mean, like, in, his entrails were like made into, plants and all this stuff. Like,
Yeah,
right
yeah.
here, it says right here, hair was made for the vegetation, as in like probably plants, grass,
Awesome.
vegetables, all that stuff, and the sky and brains. His brains were made out of clouds. That's interesting. I
What?
remember reading this in Neil Gaiman's book because I loved his modernization of this. In the poetic edda and prose edda, it's kind of
Mhm.
harder to comprehend in a sense. But in the soil was made from his skin and muscles and a mere
Mhm.
skull aloft above the earth. So it basically, you know, a mere skull is our atmosphere.
That's pretty metal.
Right? Right? I just
Damn Vikings.
wow.
That's metal as fuck.
That's been a fuck, bro.
I love it. So there you have it. We have
Right.
the world. Ymir comes in, just is. Amla the
Mm-hmm.
cow just kind of is. As she's looking, she discovers these various gods trapped in the ice.
Yeah.
They suckle her for nutrients. All the while, Ymir is just kind of as what doing his thing. Amla
Yep.
the cow just kind of is.
Oh
As she's
shit. Yeah. I was playing us in
and
the background. My bad. But yeah,
actually, I don't think we touched on this. How was Ymir sacrificed?
I mean, he wasn't technically sacrificed. I mean, they had these axes and swords and shit.
Yeah.
They were like, dude, I would get so sick of the void, and that's how I see it. I mean, it's not, and back in creationism myths and all that stuff, it's kind of like very um blunt. Not blunt. What is that word? Like, it's non-descriptive in a sense. It just goes, this happened, this happened, this happened.
The word escapes me as well. Someone out there will probably be screaming at their computer screen, going, "It's this word, you idiots!" Well, hey, you know what?
Asshole!
If you guys, if Alex Jones, is that you? We
Goddamn gay frogs!
we should almost make Alex Jones like our third our third host,
I I
our
would love
co
it.
host.
I would love it, man. I would love it.
But yeah, if you guys have that word in mind, hit like, hit subscribe,
Yeah.
share the podcast, type the word in. We'll use that word and we'll shout you. We'll give you a shout out next episode. We'll
Goddamn
lead in with
liberals
it.
killed the mirror. Anyways. Sorry.
Too funny.
That
All
was
right, so
good.
we have creation, and of course, after every creation, there's a little settling period, but peace doesn't last forever because these are myths. They're supposed to teach us something. And
Yeah.
how can you prepare yourself for the world without conflict? So naturally, we have a war, and this war is between the Aesir and Vanir. And as we
Yeah.
were told a little bit earlier, the Aesir were the gods, the good old guard, Odin chief among them. But
Mhm.
who are the Vanir? Bryce, who are the Vanir?
The Vanir. Okay, so Freya, the goddess of fertility and stuff.
I like the
Um,
Vanir.
yeah. No, they're mostly they're mostly gods of like rebirth, nature.
Sure.
Where the Aesir are more gods of war in a sense.
Yeah.
Like they're more like what humans are.
Like the abstracted idea of mankind, made
Yes.
manifest as
Yeah.
gods. Aesir and Vanir, you could say, are kind of like the more naturally occurring gods.
Right. And they were in Vanaheim. They live in Vanaheim. It's like it's a
Anaheim, beautiful country.
Vanaheim. Don't you know?
Anaheim, I like it.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it actually sounds like a beautiful country in the myths and stories because the Vanir, um, they like it's supposed to be like this, oceanic city and with nice, beautiful forests and stuff.
Mm.
It's something more closely related to, from my opinion, not
It's an opinion, people.
oh,
Let the man
listen to this,
talk.
guys. It's my opinion. God, that's not how it is. Yep, opinion. It's kind of closely more related to like how Midgard is today.
Mm,
Kind of more like
yeah.
cities on seas and all this stuff and beautiful stuff. And it consisted of like Freya and Frey and Njord. Njord was one of like he was a god of the hunters. Yeah. No, that's Uller. God.
Uller.
Yeah, that's Uller. My bad.
Don't worry, we'll get our gods straightened out by the end of this.
You know, there's like after like researching all this stuff, like I mean, throughout my time, it's really there's over about 20 gods in like this whole like tree of everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, it originally was mostly like Thor, Odin, Freya, Tyr, you know, like just those. Oh,
Yeah,
and
top
Loki,
tier.
Loki too.
But then as soon as you like start incorporating those lesser gods, third tier gods, demigods, higher
Right,
gods, all
right.
this thing,
Well,
I'm sure it mushrooms out pretty damn quick.
and going back to like Snorri Sturluson at the time too. Um,
Snorri Sturluson, remind
in
the
the
folks at
12
home who that might
Snorri
be.
Sturluson okay after his countries it was I mean he was a Christian and he was a historian and a skald. Skald was a poet. But he was
Mm.
like, oh man, I really want our country now that's converted into Christianity um, to actually remember our culture, like
Yeah.
our old ways
And
and all
what
that.
time was Snorri here
It was around
walking about this earth?
the mid 1200s,
Mid
and that's when
1200s.
he
Yeah.
added like people like Bragi. Bragi's the god of poetry. He added like the conflicts between the Vanir and Aesir, and he added mostly everything to kind of give it a more story wise thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's
Even also an interesting point is that Snorri here is compiling all these stories together kind of well after the Vikings themselves, as we kind of
right.
imagine them, have existed. Because at this point in the 1250s and 1200s, these once wayward traders, merchants, seafarers, settlers, and explorers have pretty much consolidated into new kingdoms, new power bases of Baltic states,
Yeah.
Norman, Saxon, French, even North Central German states, right? And
Yep.
so
Yep.
they're more so in tune to the very people they conquered, say some half millennia prior, with their feudalistic holdings than the actual Vikings. So what's interesting is that in a almost like a gambit to be like we can't really forget who we are, where we came from. They wrote down the
Right.
stories, but they wrote the stories down after they were really Vikings. And they were looking kind of behind them through a lens of, well, we're all pretty much Christian now. That pagan stuff, that was silly, but it's kind of,
Right. And even at the
so
time,
let's
like,
write it down.
well, right. I mean, even at the time, I mean, like there was still paganism. There was
Yeah,
still
and
pagans
that's
believing.
yeah, and that's the thing too. I'm sure in very remote pockets, kind of like just beyond like the hill people who don't want to live and pay taxes, but they don't bother anybody. Fuck it, they I imagine would have kept the religion and the practices alive, which actually still continue to this day in some
Yeah.
pockets,
Yeah.
which is pretty neat, pretty damn.
Yep. It's pretty interesting too. It's super interesting.
But one thing we can't forget is that almost everything we really factually archaeologically know, or not really archaeologically, but academically know about the Vikings, which is supported by our archaeological findings,
Yeah.
comes from source material written after the Viking Age predominantly.
Well, like
Which is
what I tell everyone, I mean, like, okay, so there's a guy, a Germanic guy named Tacitus. He was like he led his own armies. This is later in the tribes, right? When the
yeah,
tribes broke out, there was millions. I mean, even like early 600s, you had the Danes, you had the Norwegians, and Swedish people ways.
yep,
Swedes, did more raiding, or yeah, Swedes did more raiding. Or no, Danes did more raiding. Swedes, they were more farmers, but they did raiding
yep,
where Norwegians, kind of did both, like mixing whatever. There
yeah,
was different people, like and there's different ways of customs and everything, um, or customs, and in ways people even did their rituals and odes
hmm
to Odin and what gods they believed in more. I mean, like it's super super crazy, and the only people that the only people historically that ever could bring back all this findings were like this man named Ibn Farid. He was a Muslim traveling with the Rus. This is when
ah, yes,
the son
yes,
of God, Farid.
that's
And
right.
he even mentioned like it's crazy. It's crazy that these that there's women traveling with them in these raids, and it's crazy that they, what they do, like how they chant, how they pray, how they, and those are like one of the only accounts. I mean, besides like the monks who said these savages drink out of their enemies' skulls, and that's where that enemy skull drinking out of enemies' skulls come from, and and so
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
dude.
they used it to their advantage. So I mean, they didn't literally drink out of enemy skulls. I'm sure a few did, and got really sick from it. But, but I mean,
Let me tell you something real quick. Drinking out of your enemy's skulls, now that's a proud tradition going
that's a goddamn.
all the way back to when someone could probably have figured out that if I crack your skull open, it makes a pretty handy cup. But now here's something that's interesting, and that we'll have to kind of like kind of highlights what this whole podcast is really about at its core, trying to separate these stories from like probably what actually happened based on what we can actually read. We want to take a pretty secular view going into this, a very unbiased view, impartial view going into this. So sure, it's easy to attribute the Vikings as being a de facto character of barbarism and barbarian, and that sure we can attribute skull drinking to them, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But did they?
It's more of a cheer, though.
Right, right, because
It's more of a cheer.
Ahmad ibn Fadlan, that Arabic traveler that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier, which Antonio Banderas portrayed in The 13th Warrior. It's based on an actual person, actual account, but the movie is not actual.
No, right,
It's
right,
entertaining as all hell, but
right,
I
right. I mean,
recommend it.
like,
It's a pretty good
it's
popcorn flick.
crazy. It's crazy.
But but
I do like that movie.
but of course, Ahmad ibn Fadlan would be writing from a position of a more developed culture at this time in
Right.
history. So naturally, and to really gain notoriety and to really ham it up and like get his accounts dispersed, he might take liberties here and there about what he might have saw. And actually, just speculating here, but being from the Middle East, he still would have had, the old Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian reliefs and carvings on hand, and some temple
Mm-hmm.
sites around him, and those actually do depict skull drinking.
Yeah.
So he must look to those and be like, well, look at those fucking savages from our own history. I'm going to attribute to these Viking characters to really make sure that we're a league ahead, a league apart, you know.
Right, right.
And so, and of course that's pure speculation. Who knows? If I was a Viking and I was short a cup, I might grab my enemy's skull and dip into my mead and ale as well. But that's
Mm.
one thing we always have to remember. Like we're gonna have to take a lot of grain of salt with us on this trip, Bryce.
I
Because
know. I know. I know. I mean, maybe if we. Oh yeah. So uh, yeah, we're not. I don't want to do it.
eat the salt, Bryce. Woo!
If you can like desanitize it and sanitize it and make it a little bit more drink worthy, maybe put a nice little plaster around it.
Yeah,
Anything that will ruin the forest, but something.
all that good stuff. Bryce,
Not
that was a hell of a tangent, ladies and gentlemen. You
that's
just
it.
witnessed, you just experienced one of many tangents that will just spring out of the fucking woodwork all willy nilly. Like, all
Like a
right,
little
we
Ratatoskit.
we gotta try and bring it back home a little bit.
Yeah,
We
no,
were
so
just about, or we're in the midst of a war between gods, a war between the Aesir and the Vanir. Why did this war start? We never asked or answered that question.
honestly, personally, for me, I've never looked into it because that was something Snorri Sturluson added
Hmm.
later in the 1200s. This is like a little bit after, but it's you know, it's I don't know much about it, but we could actually cover an episode about that later.
Yeah, the war of the Aesir and the Vanir. Actually, yeah, that could itself just be a whole an
A
episode. We
whole
should totally do
episode
that.
thing. Yeah, I mean
All
because
right, we'll
like
leave a little bookmark. Boom, War of the Aesir.
there we go.
That's too good.
Yeah. I
That's too
mean,
good.
I'm trying to think because I mean, there's dwarves that oh yeah, the dwarves. Crap, I
There are
can't remember.
dwarves.
Dwarves.
Hey.
They they uh they were created. Um, they weren't even created. I don't even know where they come from, but they hold up the sky like Ymir's. Well, in that sense, Ymir's skull, and they
Huh.
hold them up like on every the north position east position and west position and south position. So that's
Interesting.
cardinal directions in a sense. So they,
Yeah.
I mean, even if you think about that from like that time of century, I mean, to know that there's four corners. I mean, they,
Well, I
you know,
mean, sun comes up one direction, sets in the other direction.
right.
I mean,
Oh, and then the other
even
opposite
through the
side, opposite side.
shifting of the
Yeah.
cosmos in the last even 10,000 years, I mean, Polaris has stayed relatively pretty well north, and even if you don't have geometry figured out, you can still be like, well, if I just turn hard left and hard right, just internalize the concept of a 90-degree turn, then that gives me two other points.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's interesting, though. What's more interesting is that you have mythic figures holding up the world, right?
Yep.
Where have we heard that before, ladies and gentlemen? That's right, Atlas. That's interesting.
Uh,
And
yeah.
that
No.
that
And
could be its own damned episode too. How
oh,
how
see,
how
right.
these like myths and creations kind of like cross pollinate between other cultures, very
Right.
distinct cultures from very
Yeah.
distinct times. Because
And
hell, in the creation myth, we had Almula, the ice-looking cow of creation.
I love that cow.
I mean,
God.
I'm sure there's more than a fair share of
Right.
stories about holy cows in
Oh.
in in
Oh.
in Hinduism. Yeah, I
Well,
did
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I did
especially
it.
Hinduism. Yeah, and I mean, okay, so there's this. Even when the creation of humans came about from the
Mm,
gods, because they're like, hey, let's make some humans, right? They made them out of whatever, and I think it was like sticks or something, some shit or other, and probably like Anbla's like poop or shit, melted it in there, made nice some pottery out of Adumla's.
well, there you go. That's a pretty good life lesson for the kids at home. You're literally
Right.
made of shit. Uh, that's
We're
grand.
all heathens, but remember, we're still shit. Uh, but I mean, like going to like even Christianity's thing, where it's like Adam and Eve, were the
Yeah.
first humans and everything, and somehow just popped up on this plane, right? I mean, but Odin and all these, Odin and the Aesir were like, hey, let's make some humans. So the shit, maybe I don't know,
Sure.
but they so Ask and Ambla. That's the two first humans. So like Adam and Eve and
Hmm.
Ask and Ambla. That's the two, like, you see that connection kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
kind of crazy. I mean, and
Well,
you
is that the dude in the 1250s, the
that,
writer, the
that was not
compiler.
Snorri Sturluson's. No,
No,
that was
no, normally stood, but but there. Here's the thing, though. I wonder if there were two characters of that, or just two names of that, in some sort of loose, conjunction in the creation myth,
right.
and Norley Sturluson being a Christian of that time, trying to uh, like reverse engineer some Norse myth to give it some, similar symbolism, similar
Mhm.
iconography. That's like, well, look, Christianity has these two people. Now Norse mythology, as I've written it and chronicled it, has these two people as the first two humans.
Right.
The bridge of like-mindedness is created right there. I mean, the same
Right.
thing as why we have damned evergreens on Christmas and why Jesus' birthday is relatively near the winter solstice. It was so we
Right.
can bring in those later paganal tribes in Germania
Yeah. Yeah.
under the Christian faith. It's
And
it's
convert them that way.
I mean,
Yeah.
reverse
It's
engineering belief systems and like conjoining them is a very old trick, and it's the best way to integrate people, just short of like a full genocidal war.
right.
But
And I
it's far cheaper,
honestly, I mean, it's interesting because then it's like later on in life, everyone's like, I'm gonna kill you
right?
unless if you admit defeat. Or these guys, like back then, it's like, hey, you're still pagan. Cool if we move your festivals with
Yeah.
our festivals, and we can actually assimilate really well, like
But
together.
not only
And
that, but let's also remember that when the Vikings really hit their full RPM and start to get into the
I
Mediterranean
love
and
that.
into full RPM,
Yeah,
when they're sending voyages to now Iceland, Greenland, and now what Labrador or Quebec,
yeah,
Newfoundland or
yeah.
whatever,
Up
when
there.
they're doing all that, that's about what, the 800s, 900s, 1100s. Well, what else is predominant in the world that they're running into? It's Christianity, and they are trading materials, they're trading stories What's
Right.
a piece of literature that they might run into, right? It's the Bible or a variation of the Bible, and they're gonna bring it back with them, and they're gonna be like, huh, look at these guys, they got some
You know,
pretty
and
cool
that's
stories.
that's
Let's
yeah,
adopt
right,
that.
and that's where I think about it. You know, like they like once they started like trading, doing more trading. I mean,
Yeah,
mostly the Swedes did the farming and trading and whatnot because they went more. The Swedes they went, more towards. If I'm not mistaken, they went more east. Yeah, east.
yeah. Well,
And
because
the
the
Danes went
Danes were like, no, dude,
right, right. No, we're
no,
just gonna no,
Britain,
no.
that's ours.
That's
And dude, let
that's
me tell
ours.
you,
And they just murdered the shit out of those
I
guys.
cannot wait to talk about the Danish invasions into Britain because
Oh,
you want to talk about some like deep dark age classic Viking.
yes, yeah.
It's when the
Oh,
Danes smack into the Angles,
oh my god.
oh, and the Saxons, and it's just it's so juicy. Lindisfarne, baby. When we kick off Lindisfarne, we should almost do a whole episode on Lindisfarne
Oh my
itself. You
god.
know,
Yes,
the
that is one
setup,
of
the
because that
execution, the
set off like the
aftermath.
whole shit. That's it.
I mean,
That set it off. That set it
that
off.
that is the traditional ground zero for the Viking Age. You know.
Right, right.
But
I
then
think in
again,
the future episodes when we get
we
into
gotta
that.
temper it. We gotta temper it. Why is Lindisfarne the classical stuff for the Viking Age? It's because the Vikings happened to hit a Christian monastery, right?
Yeah.
And they kept coming, right? So who knows? I mean, if the Vikings were still, if there was, the United States of Viking, and we asked the Vikings, well, when did your history start? They could probably be like, fuck it, when the Romans were trying to build roads up this way, right? But
If it
you
was
know,
the United States of Viking ship here during this day, I would be like, God, what a great time. I mean, you got all that free market trade sharing with people. You're like sitting there like,
right?
yeah, let's do this, do this. Oh,
They'd have the
who's your
world's
king?
finest bodyguards,
Oh my God.
fit
Oh
for an
my,
emperor.
yeah, that would be just so great.
But
God.
what's interesting about this Viking story is that again, we really only hear or care about the Vikings because they hit Christendom, right? And when you
Yep.
hit Christendom from our Western traditional mindset, right, it becomes
Yeah.
personal. And this is something worth writing down.
Yes. You will get your revenge.
That's cool.
But yeah, I mean, it's
We
really
got a
cool.
lot of topics, dude. Oh,
Ah,
so
dude,
many
I
topics.
know, I love
So
it,
many good topics.
I know. Especially then when we get into Germanic storytelling, William the Conqueror, one of my favorites.
Mm,
I actually shout out to this one girl. I forgot her name. Sorry about that. But she gave me like she wants us to do a thing on William the Conqueror.
good
William the
old
First. Oh
1066.
God, 1066. Those were the days. Never forget.
Well, I don't know. I kind of like indoor plumbing and air conditioning.
I did too. Yeah. I
Call
mean,
me a softie,
you're goddamn pussy.
but I
I
also
mean,
like penicillin, and the knowledge of antibiotics on hand.
oh my god, you're one of those. No, we're not going to get into politics. All right.
If we get into politics, it's going to be the politics that these people had to go through.
Right, right.
Who
with,
knows?
with some of our shit, but I mean,
Too
like,
fun.
yeah.
And that's the thing too, because I do want to run the gamut of uh, of the Viking Norse myths.
Mm-hmm,
Because I mean,
mm-hmm.
we're right up against the War of the Aesir and the Vanir, and I feel like this is a topic that almost deserves its own episode as well.
It does. It does. I seriously want to like look up on it because I remember reading a little about it, but
Hmm
I
hmm
wanted to get into the creation like of the world first,
Yeah.
and I didn't know it was going to be that short.
Well,
But the tangents.
well, I mean, before the world's created, before you instilled how physics work, what is short? What is long? It's all relative, Bryce.
It's all cow shit.
It's all cow shit.
It's all cow shit.
That's
Wow.
that is interesting though. That within the Viking mythic sphere, Izmir comes up. There's this ice-licking cow. People are shooting out of armpits. There's folks trapped in ice. They come to be like Odin and his brothers. Like Odin gets drunk and says, "Hey man, you want to make Earth Midgard?" And they're like, "Man, fuck it, whatever. He's drunk. Go along with him."
Sure.
Like,
Pick up your goddamn axes. We're gonna go take out Granddad.
like if you really want to understand people, look to their creation myths, look to their religion, look to their creation stories.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything we talked about is sounds crazy, well, you gotta look at the people who wrote it down and told it. We're gonna
Yeah.
be dealing with some very interesting persons,
Yeah.
to
I
put it
mean, you
mildly.
know, like the cool thing though, like a lot of people that follow Viking Empire are still heathens, and they like follow this. You know, like if with any religion, there's going to be
Mm.
millions of different translations. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
or spiritualities.
Ah,
Um,
hell, dude.
and
Mistranslating the context and meaning of a word, that itself could be a whole
I
damn
mean,
topic.
even Christianity, I'm sure it was like do this, do this, do
Oh
this
yeah.
happened, and then now it's like a
Well, the various
goddamn like
translations of the
you
Bible
know,
from high-minded, like a more high-minded, snooty version of Greek, down to Attic Greek, which was like a vernacular that the
yeah,
common man spoke. I
yep,
mean, how the hell do you change that? I mean, like take, I mean, imagine we had to rewrite the Constitution, but use only like modern tweeting emoji and acronyms and GIFs, and how much
yeah,
did we have to change and compromise, and what meaning is lost, what meaning is added. Shit.
yeah,
That just blew my own mind.
yeah.
No, but in subsequent episodes here, I think at least another at least another three more. I think we should still keep diving down and explore the religion and myths and creation stories behind the Vikings.
Hmm.
Because again, how can we understand these people unless we understand what gets them up in the morning? Like what are they afraid of when they die? What are they looking forward to when they die?
Right. And a lot of that back then, it was like, or, you know, like way back then, even till today, like I'm very unbiased about everything in people's religions. I'm like, I'll coexist, you know, whatever the hell.
Yeah,
But
dude, I'm the same
I,
way. Do
right,
what you
right.
want, but
Do
don't
what you want.
preach at me.
Right. And that's why I love the Viking religion, though, is it because they are not snooty about this shit. They don't
Mm-mm.
go, believe this thing. No, they got their beliefs and then they keep quiet. Where
Right?
you know, and that's why Christianity took place. It's like because they were very loud and proud about that. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like
We're here. We're saving you. Get used to it.
that.
Christianity.
Our Jesus died on a cross.
Right? It's too funny.
Our
To which,
God.
the Viking would say something to the tune of like, oh, your god died? Sounds like you need a new god.
No shit.
You know?
We
It's too
have
funny.
millions of backup.
Yeah. Our gods have backup. Our god's backup has backup.
Oh my God.
It's too funny.
That's so funny.
But yeah,
That's so funny.
folks, we are only scratching the surface of this whole campaign, and we're glad to have you along. Do spread the word of the Viking Empire podcast. Message us either on the YouTube video or the website directly. The link to the website will be in the video description because we want to hear from you. Because as much fun we're having here, just Bryce and I chatting and bantering away, we want to see what you folks want to hear and learn about, right? Like, give us a little direction because we have our own kind of ideas sitting on the sideline, but we want to kind of, make this a community group effort. I mean, think about it. If the Vikings were all about individualism, who the hell's rowing the ships?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a group effort, damn it.
It's a goddamn group effort.
So, hmm. So yeah, either we'll set up, I don't know, maybe a forum or so on VikingEmpire.com and just kind of see what people's initial reactions are, what they like, what they don't like, what topics they want us to do, what topics they don't want us to do, all this and that, maybe, and especially inaccuracies, because we're going to stumble into a lot of inaccuracies, like goddamn American GIs into punji traps. It's unavoidable. It's going to happen. It's going to be ugly. But we want to be able to, lend some insight and like kind of, give edits where we're able and capable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. This is just, yeah. That's a good way to end it.
I think it is a good way to end it.
That's a good way to
Well,
end it.
folks, this is the first episode of the Viking Empire podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Cristofo. My co-host is Bryce. Bryce, say hello to and goodbye to the fine people at home.
Hello, goodbye.
Oh, he knows a hello.
I'm in Germany, anyways. Okay.
And we will hopefully be back soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Skull. Skull. Skull.
Skull, 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 skull.